Welcome back to the cryptowrld channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and right now, Bitcoin is still struggling at this major area of resistance in the short term, but we now have a huge amount of liquidity building above the price of Bitcoin, which is something that we need to pay attention to. So in just a moment, I'll be talking about what this means for the price of Bitcoin moving forward, while Ethereum is now struggling and perfectly rejecting from this important level of resistance in the short term, while the price of XRP is potentially on its way towards another retest towards this area of resistance in the short term. So I'll be talking about all of that and more later in the video, so definitely watch to the end. First of all, starting off on the weekly Bitcoin price chart, and the super trend indicator is still sitting in the red, indicating a larger bearish trend or a larger correction for the price of Bitcoin. And if we're taking a look at this weekly Bitcoin price chart, we still have this massive bearish divergence to watch out for, causing a lot of weakness, lacking bullish momentum on the larger time frames. So over the last one day, not a lot has changed on these weekly time frames. And if we're taking a look at this daily Bitcoin price chart, at least for now, we're still somewhat playing out the oversold signal, but I'll not necessarily rely on this oversold signal on the daily time frame for too much longer, because we've already played it out for around a week now, just like what we saw last time, around a week of a short-term bullish move before potentially heading lower later on. But we also have to remember that we not only have this oversold signal on the daily time frame, we have an oversold signal on the 3-day Bitcoin RSI as well. And so if we're looking at what happened last time, we saw an oversold signal the last couple of times here in the 3-day Bitcoin RSI. That was over 3 years ago in mid-2022, and what came next was either a sideways consolidation or a bit more of a bullish relief over the next multiple weeks. So rather than just around 1 week based on this daily time frame playing out, potentially a few weeks, a couple of weeks could be a likely scenario for a relief or a sideways consolidation for the price of Bitcoin. But remember, if it does turn out to be a little bit more of a sideways consolidation, that contains both short-term bullish and short-term bearish price action kind of bouncing around sideways. So just be aware, if we see, for example, a short-term rejection from resistance, which I'll talk about in just a moment, that does not necessarily mean this oversold signal's no longer playing out. It's possible we could chop around sideways a little longer in the coming days or over the next 1 week or so. And so overall, once again, I'll not necessarily rely on this oversold signal any longer on the daily time frame, but due to the fact that we have one on the 3-day time frame, it could likely play out a little longer here in the short term, in the coming days or the next week or so. And if we're taking a look at this daily Bitcoin price chart, as always, we cannot ignore support or resistance, where the price could potentially bounce at in the case of support, or reject from or struggle at in the case of resistance. And so first of all, when it comes to support, we still have a lot of support at give or take 85,000. So continue to expect a lot of support around 85,000 if the price were to actually get back down there. And as for resistance, obviously, as I've been saying this entire time throughout this entire bounce all the way back down here, the main area of resistance to watch out for is really in between around 92 to 94,000. As soon as the price enters that area, expect the price to struggle or possibly reject from around that area on the price chart. That's exactly what I said since all the way back down here, and that's exactly what has just happened. As soon as we entered into this exact area on the price chart, we've now seen struggle and a slight rejection from that area. And so obviously continue to expect a lot of resistance in that area in between 92 to 94,000 if the price ultimately retests that area. But as I talked about in my last video, as long as the price does not really see a harsh rejection, and if, for example, in the coming days, we continue pressing up against this resistance, if that continues to play out here, then that can actually weaken the resistance, increasing the probability of a potential breakout beyond that resistance. But for now, once again, so far, we're not really seeing a lot of press up against the resistance. So far, we are playing out a little bit more of a rejection here, which is a short-term sign of some weakness in the price. And so honestly, based on this initial reaction from this resistance right now in the short term, just over the rest of this weekend, I do expect a little bit of weakness in the price. I don't necessarily expect any breakout just for the weekend, but definitely pay attention to what the US stock market does when it opens back up again on Monday, because if the US stock market continues that recovery towards the all-time highs, which I talked about in recent videos here on the channel, if the US stock market keeps pumping in next week, basically when it opens back up again, then that can also increase the probability we could see a breakout for Bitcoin. But obviously, considering the fact that the stock market's closed over the weekend, I do expect the price of Bitcoin here to actually remain underneath this resistance and have a little bit of weakness in the shorter term just for the weekend while we wait for the stock market to open back up again. And if we're zooming further into the short term, taking a look at the 6-hour Bitcoin price chart, technically speaking, we've not yet confirmed any invalidation signal to actually invalidate this shorter term bullish divergence, which means at least for now, it is technically still active, still influencing the price of Bitcoin, which is one of the reasons, alongside, of course, the oversold signal on the 3-day Bitcoin RSI. These are some reasons in the short term as to why we might not necessarily see a major dump. So potentially a little bit of weakness, but not necessarily a lot of bearish price action. In other words, some very, very slight or mild bearish price action like this, or maybe a bit of sideways price action, is ultimately what I sort of expect just for the weekend. And then all eyes are on the stock market next week. And another thing to consider when it comes to the price of Bitcoin here is, of course, the Bitcoin liquidation heat map, because right now we have a lot of liquidity building above the price of Bitcoin here in the short term, with most of it sitting at roughly 94,000, really in between around 93.3k all the way up towards almost 95,000. That entire area right there, we have a lot of liquidity, with most of it once again sitting at close to 94,000. So in case you're new to all of this, usually, not always, but usually the price of Bitcoin tends to move towards where we have a lot of liquidity. So this obviously suggests a potential bullish move towards close to 94,000 to wipe out that liquidity. But once again, as I said earlier, we still have this major area of resistance just above the price of Bitcoin, causing the price to struggle a little bit in the short term. So like I said earlier, it's unlikely we'll perhaps see a breakout or hit that liquidity over the weekend, but that's something that could potentially happen maybe next week, depending on how the stock market performs next week. And so if you haven't done so already, this is definitely the time to get set up, ready to go on a crypto exchange to take advantage of this next potential trading opportunity for the price of Bitcoin or any other crypto. And if you want to do that, check out the first link below this video in the description and in the pinned comment, because that first link below the video will take you to this page right here over on Pinex, the Pinex crypto exchange, where you can take advantage of some massive bonuses that are only available using that link. So for example, if you make your account using that link and then make a deposit as little as 100 USDT, you get a $200 deposit bonus. If you deposit, say, 1,000, you get a $600 deposit bonus. If you deposit these much larger amounts, you can get up to 40,000 USDT in a deposit bonus. This is basically free money from the exchange deposited in your account alongside your own deposit. And then of course you could use the deposit bonus, use the exchange's money to actually fund one of these Bitcoin trades if you want to. But once again, all of these bonuses right here are only available exclusively to invited users. In other words, you simply just have to make your account using the link below the video, and then you can take advantage of these major bonuses. If you don't use that link, unfortunately, you can't claim any of these bonuses here. So if you're going to be trading crypto anyway, or preparing to take the next trading opportunity, you might as well get set up ready to go using that first link below this video. But if you want a no KYC crypto exchange, another exchange that I also use for long positions and short positions, for that, check out the second link below this video. That second link in the description and in the pinned comment will take you to this page right here over on 2bit, the 2bit crypto exchange, where you can also take advantage, alongside extra deposit bonuses and things like that that are only available using that link. You can also take advantage of currently a trade protection fund and recovery fund. And so as you can see right here, new users that are making an account using that link below the video during this event that's running right now will receive 100% loss protection on your first futures trade, up to 200 USDT in trial funds. And on top of that, if you're actually getting liquidated during this event right here over on 2bit, if you're using the link below the video, liquidation over 50 USDT during this event, you may be eligible for a recovery compensation up to 1,000 USDT. So in other words, you could potentially get some of your losses back if you're losing money during this event right here over on 2bit. So once again, if you're going to be trading crypto anyway, might as well check this out. Second link below this video. And once again, 2bit is a no KYC exchange. But with that being said, taking a quick look at the Bitcoin dominance chart on the daily time frame, and right now obviously we are continuing to see a little bit more of a short-term bounce in the Bitcoin dominance, but overall we're not really seeing significant momentum to either direction, just shorter-term bearish and shorter-term bullish moves, but kind of just bouncing around relatively sideways. Obviously we're not really in a strong trend for the Bitcoin dominance, at least as of right now. And so in other words, this is basically telling us that a lot of the major altcoins out there on average will likely be performing very similar to whatever Bitcoin is doing, not necessarily much better or much worse. And if we're taking a look at Ethereum on the daily time frame, right now the price of ETH is also struggling struggling at and starting to potentially reject from this exact level of resistance that I've been warning about, sitting at around 3040. So just above 3,000, really in between 3,000 to 3.1k is the major area of resistance that I've been warning about ever since we perfectly bounced from this exact level of support at around 2620. And so obviously continue to expect support at this support here that I've been saying in between roughly 2.6k to 2.7k, and continue to expect a lot of resistance in between roughly 3,000 to 3.1k. And like I just said earlier with the Bitcoin dominance situation, Ethereum will likely be performing very similar to whatever Bitcoin is doing, which means if Bitcoin struggles a little bit around this resistance as we are doing in the short term, if this continues potentially over the weekend, which is a very likely scenario, then expect a little bit more struggle over the weekend for Ethereum as a very likely scenario. But of course, the price of ETH is also still to some degree playing out this oversold signal, but I'll not necessarily rely on this too much longer just based on this chart alone, because if we're looking at the last couple of oversold signals or close to oversold signals in the daily Ethereum RSI, these only played out for just a few days, maybe a week or two before they started to lose relevance, before we basically reset the RSI already, and we now have more room towards the downside again to continue the bearish trend, which is why I've been saying this entire time. Obviously, I've been saying since right down here, yes, I expect a bullish relief over the coming days, maybe over the next week, but this is not necessarily confirming the bottom is in, because for example, if you thought that back here, you were completely wrong. We ultimately head lower later on. And so just be aware of the risk that we are potentially still within the larger bearish trend, because we've not yet fully confirmed a reversal or an end to this larger bearish trend, at least as of right now, which means for all we know, this could just be another short-term bullish move during the larger bearish trend, kind of like what we saw just here or just here, for example. But at least for now, and especially if Bitcoin obviously continues the bullish relief, potentially in the new week after a little bit of a weakness or struggle maybe over the weekend, if we continue more of a bullish relief, and especially if Bitcoin breaks out maybe next week, then of course Ethereum will likely play out something similar. So really pay attention to what Bitcoin is doing to figure out what is likely going to happen for Ethereum and a lot of these major altcoins. And if we're taking a look at the price of Solana on the 2-day time frame, it's a very similar situation for Solana. Technically speaking, the larger trend and the larger price structure is still obviously pointing in the bearish direction, still forming lower highs and lower lows. But the short-term situation is that we're now bouncing between support and resistance. First of all, we have a lot of support at roughly 124 to 127, and a lot of resistance in between around 143 to 147. And just over the last couple of days, that's pretty much exactly where the price just perfectly rejected from. And so overall, continue to expect support at this support, resistance at this resistance, and in the short term, over the next few days, maybe over the weekend, it's likely will continue to show a little bit of weakness, especially if Bitcoin plays out something similar over the weekend, just showing a bit of weakness, continuing a slight rejection from this resistance. But for Solana, potentially still remaining within this range right here, in between roughly 124 to 147, kind of just bouncing around in a bit of a sideways price range just for the time being in the short term. And if we're taking a look at the price of XRP on the weekly time frame, we technically still have that massive bearish divergence to watch out for. It's not gone away. It's not yet confirmed any invalidation signal to invalidate the bearish divergence. So keep that in mind. Still something to watch out for on the much larger time frames, but also remember, this is not a short-term signal. This is something that's been playing out over multiple months. And if we're taking a look at the daily XRP price chart, what is more of a shorter term signal is of course this smaller bullish divergence on the daily XRP price chart. And so obviously, considering the fact that at least for now this is also still currently active in the shorter term, this is suggesting potentially another retest at some point in the next few days, maybe not for the weekend, but maybe in the new week. Another retest could be likely of this resistance here, still sitting in between around $2.30 to $2.40. So continue to expect a lot of resistance, a lot of struggle around that area on the price chart. And over the last few days with the latest local highs, that's pretty much exactly where the price rejected from, within about 1 cent of $2.30. But remember, as I've been saying throughout the video, just over the weekend, it's likely the price could show a little bit of weakness, not necessarily crashing, but maybe a very slight bearish move or a bit of choppy sideways price action over the weekend is quite likely, especially if Bitcoin plays out something similar. And as for support to watch out for, if we were to see a little bit more of a pullback here. In that situation, we do have a small amount of support at roughly $2.15, but the next major support to watch out for is just above $2, really in between around $2.05 to $2.07. And if we're taking a look at the price of Chainlink on the daily time frame, it's a similar situation for Chainlink. Obviously, the larger trend, the larger price structure, still technically bearish, forming lower highs and lower lows. And over the last 1 week or so, we have played out an oversold signal in the daily Chainlink RSI very nicely here in the form of a short-term bullish relief. But I'll now really no longer rely on this oversold signal any longer. It's already perfectly played out here, because we can see that the RSI has well and truly reset out of those oversold territories up towards more neutral levels, which has now technically given us more room towards the downside again to possibly continue the larger bearish trend with simply another leg towards the downside. So for all we know, this could just be another short-term bullish move during the larger bearish trend, which is why I've been saying the entire time we're potentially just playing out a shorter term move within a larger trend. We've not yet confirmed the end of this larger bearish trend. And so at least for this weekend, considering the rejection so far from this resistance, I do expect either a slight bearish move or a bit of weakness. Either way, just the price struggling a little bit over the weekend is very, very likely. But then depending on how the US stock market performs in the new week on Monday, Tuesday, especially if Bitcoin sees some sort of breakout in the new week, then of course that can help Chainlink and some of these major altcoins hold up a little bit better if that starts to play out for Bitcoin and stocks in the new week. But at least for the weekend, for the next 1 or 2 days, I do expect a little bit of weakness in the short term for Chainlink and a lot of the crypto market. And of course, over the last couple of days, we have been rejecting from this resistance right here, sitting at roughly around $13.40. So still expect a lot of resistance around that area, a lot of struggle around that area. And if we break out past $13.40 and actually hold above that level, in that situation, would likely see a move up towards roughly $14.50 as a potential point of resistance. And above that, we have major resistance in between $15.20 to $15.70. And as for support, if we continue a further rejection in the short term, in that situation, expect some support at just above $12, around $12.10, and a lot of support in between around $11.60 to $11.70. So roughly around $11.60 as a major point of support. And remember, if you want to trade any of these moves or get set up ready to go to take the next trading opportunity, check out the links below this video to those exchanges if you want to claim the massive bonuses that are only available using those links. And if you want to actually know how you can trade a crypto no matter what the price is doing, then make sure to watch these videos popping up right here on your screen. The video in the top left shows you how you can profit from bullish or bearish price action using long positions or short positions, and the video in the bottom left shows you how you can easily profit from choppy sideways price action. But anyway, that is everything that I have to say for today. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.